Welcome on inside yet another edition of the Business of Social podcast powered by STN Digital. I'm your host, David Brickley. Each and every show, we talk to the experts and get their expert advice on the ever-changing digital social marketing landscape. This show is no different because what we're doing, and producer Will, it's been a second. Good to see you, man. I know you battled the vid. You were on the COVID protocol list.
Yeah, I had a little bout of the Omicron, but I'm back.
We had to sign a couple 10-day contracts to get past
a couple two-ways.
What was a difficult time without Will Kelly in the house. But hey, man, glad you're feeling healthy and good. And I know with the holidays, it's always difficult to schedule the pod with everybody's out of offices and things like that. So it's been a minute since we've talked to some of y'all fine folks. However, I'm excited for this one, Will, because if I had to guess, if you're listening right now, you probably haven't listened to every single podcast. If you have, send me an email and I'll send you a gift because that's a pretty damn good listenership there on your side. But I know our boy Evan that we work with listens to almost every episode. He always gives me some nice feedback. So Evan, if you're listening, I appreciate you. All right, so man, we talked to Will, a lot of amazing brands. I mean, as far as like the sexiness of brands, I think this was the best year yet.
Yeah, for sure.
Kudos to you, but you could probably speak to some of the brands that we talked to in 2021.
Yeah, I'll just list them out. Yeah. I definitely think it's much more quality this year for sure, as opposed to quantity. But yeah, I mean, just reading them off the list, you have ESPN, Jack in the Box, Patagonia, the NHL, Reddit, JanSport, Marvel, Disney, Netflix, Shareablee, Momentum, Douglas Elliman, Coke, Electric, Twitter, the PGA Tour, Peloton.
Yeah, Peloton.
Liquid Death.
Liquid Death, great
David
episode.
Brickley's new favorite water brand.
Big fan.
ESPN Plus, Eagle Creek, Team Liquid, the biggest name in the esports
I mean, if
game,
Liquid Death would send over a case, I mean, I've had one here on the table. You know, I saw the Two Bears, One Cave, Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura. They have Liquid Death on their table every podcast. I mean,
I see it everywhere in the store. It's a little pricey for water, but everybody swears by it. I mean, they have like such a loyal following.
Yeah, and I noticed on the graphic we're going to post on social, Devin Dismang makes the list right next to ESPN, Liquid Death, and Peloton. I mean,
he's eating that up, I'm sure.
Wow, what a of course, Devin Dismang, our Director of Athlete Partnerships. All right, so what we wanted to do, and if you guys remember, we did this last year to wrap up what was 2020. We are going to wrap up 2021. So what's great about this show is if you missed an episode, if you weren't sure, if you not sure if you wanted to dedicate the 45 minutes for a certain guest or for a certain brand, this is going to be all jam-packed in, like 20 of the top highlights from all those brands that Will and I just listed off. And just take a look back because I think there's so many episodes that were just incredible from start to finish. And if you didn't check one out, this will kind of remind you, you know what, let me go check out, Preston over at the PGA. Let me go check out the Jack in the Box episode with Morgan Higgins and things like that. So I think it's going to be awesome to break it down. So why don't we just go, I know no particular order. We don't want to play favorites here, Will. But we did pull, what would you say, like the top 20 highlights of 2021?
Yeah, just going to go through, like you said, and I'll go through and timestamp them too after the episode. So if there is anything in particular that you want to see or share with somebody, we'll have that all in the description and everything. But yeah, we're just going to go through the top 20 or so and just kind of give a quick breakdown on everyone's thoughts.
All right, so I guess we'll go pretty much in chronological order. The first person we talked to in 2021 was Ash Dunn. He's the brand strategy lead over at Reddit. And Reddit is such an important part of the internet and marketing campaigns and brand launches. I asked him the best way to leverage Reddit. Obviously, you have your AMAs, you have your different campaigns that you can run, but on a day-to-day basis, like what would be your recommendation for brands and what their Reddit strategy or what their goals should be when, just leveraging the platform?
Yeah, first and foremost, listening. And listening is especially important now, I think, more than ever. And it's especially important on a community platform because, Reddit is a 15-year-old platform. So a lot of the communities that exist have been there for some time. And people are there posting, whether it's a community about a brand or, a particular hobby or passion. The people that are there, are essentially volunteers, right? And they are, pouring a lot of energy into, keeping, the community healthy. And so, as a brand, I think it's important to really understand these spaces. And the best way to do that is by lurking and listening, because lurking is learning, and it's also just one of those things too, where, on Reddit, so much of the conversation is dictated by the rules of the community. So, if you're in a community, that is about, cats standing up, well, you can't post things about dogs, right?
That's a big no-no, yeah.
Yeah. So there's always a little bit of nuance to it. And the best way to understand that and navigate it is to listen.
I always love talking to my guy, Ash Dunn, both on and off the pod. Will, you know him well. I mean, always brings a ton of energy and love his vibe. So I hope all of you guys are looking at Reddit to listen, right? Like he mentioned, because that can just provide so much value about what your consumer is saying, what they're feeling as you pivot that strategy onto other platforms. All right. Speaking of pivoting, I asked Monica Regali about how to pivot with the market, especially when we were right in the kind of middle of still COVID I guess we still are. But I asked her, as she oversees global marketing, both at JanSport and Eagle Creek, that VF Corp umbrella oversees so many amazing brands like Supreme. But I asked her how she and the brands were able to pivot with the market. You guys sold out of tents on the North Face, like in the first couple of weeks, because people were either tenting in their backyard or what's the only safe thing to do? Let's, hike up in the mountains and pitch a tent. So things like, like hiking and traveling in that regard and golf and different things that started to expand really quickly once the lockdown started as well.
So Steve hit it on the head. We had to pivot immediately. Back in March, Eagle Creek was planning a campaign about travel wellness and how travel actually improves your immune system and makes you healthier, as well as like opens the mind, right, to cultures and people. We immediately scrapped that in March, and we came up with a new campaign called Adventure Within Reach and started talking about things like car camping and finding a trail near your home, that you didn't know about before, getting the bike out again, and just, adventure could be, getting on your bike, your mountain bike, and finding a bike path in your city that you haven't been on before. That can be very adventurous for some people. As a result, our product messages went from rolling luggage, which no one was rolling luggage for most of the year, to duffel bags. And our duffel business went up 62% every year, in the triple digits. So Eagle Creek became less of a luggage brand in 2020 and more of a duffel brand, an organization brand with our Packet. We have a brand called Packet that's all about packing org and keeping your suitcase or your duffel bag organized, and then also backpacks. So we pivoted not only messaging, but the kind of product that we were talking about.
All right, so for our next one, Scott Carrington, he oversees digital marketing, media, and advocacy over at Patagonia. Will, you and I love ourselves some Patagonia because they probably, better than almost any brand on social media, have developed that community and just those loyal ambassadors and loyal consumers that, just love everything that brand does and stands for.
I think this was really eye-opening too on how much stuff Patagonia actually does and like how much they really put their word behind their messaging.
Yeah, so speaking of that, I think Patagonia, more than anybody, what I've learned from them over time, watching that brand from afar, is they do an amazing job at telling the story behind their product. They're never really selling at you, but rather they kind of bring you into that story. And as my guy Scott said, there's always a story to any product. Walk me through internally at Patagonia, if you guys are coming out with a new product, if you guys are really excited about like a new fall lineup that you guys are launching before the winter season, how do those conversations work? Because I'm sure from your standpoint, you're like, great, how do we weave in a story to make sure that we're amplifying these new amazing products, but not in a salesy way?
Yeah. Well, anything that we're sort of bringing to market, like in a bigger way, there is, I don't want to say 100% of the time, but usually there is a story there, like a supply chain story or like a tech, like innovation story. And so it doesn't, and we don't tell it, it kind of gets down to how you tell it as well. Because there's not really we're not at conflict bringing that to market. I guess where it does get maybe uncomfortable is when it's like retargeting ads and it's a product lay down shot, things like that. But we're super proud of the supply chain innovation and just the pinnacle product that we put out there. So and we want to celebrate it. And then it's really how I think, how do you tell that story that's true to you?
So there it was, Scott Carrington. It is so true, right? Like sometimes you think like, does this really have a heartfelt tearjerker story? But you can also speak about the tech or the innovation when it comes to apparel and product too, which they do just such an amazing job of, or how the product's going to help you perform out there when you're hiking or if you're in sports, how it's going to help you perform better, which I think, the Nikes of the world do a pretty amazing job of as well. All right, so we're going to move on to ESPN. One of my good friends in the industry, she's the VP of social, Katie Daly. And, they've done this pretty well, especially bringing Omar over from House of Highlights, Will, where they've attached his voice, his brand to SportsCenter and what they're doing over there. And I asked her, put your consulting hat on for me. Is it important to have that @ handle of who's speaking behind a brand that's worked well for SportsCenter? Would it work well for all brands? What are your thoughts on brands and handles having a voice behind it, having a personality? And you look at ESPN, it's PTI with Wilbon and Kornheiser. It's SportsCenter with Scott Van Pelt. It's actually worked to attach a name to a lot of linear programs. What do you think the future is, and what is your recommendation for brands when it comes to like, should there be a leading voice when it comes to brands on social?
Yeah, I do. I think it depends on what the audience already knows about your brand. Mm-hmm. So my answer varies there, but we've talked about it a lot internally. We've talked about there's a huge upside to saying, right? Like here's the person behind the account. If you have questions, feedback, you want to send them content, like it just more personal. Mm-hmm. But if you do have an umbrella brand that is a lot of different things to a lot of people, there's a challenge there. Yeah. And I think, so I think if I were starting a brand net new in a specific, let's say like a sport vertical or a specific fashion vertical, I'm a pretty big believer that this next generation of fans is going to continue to want to connect on a more one-to-one level and a human level with brands. But if you already have a particular brand equity, right, with that audience, you may need to think differently and approach that differently.
Always, Katie's a two-time. Will, we only have a handful of two-time listeners. I think in 2022, we're going to have to figure out.
She's in the BOS Hall of Fame.
Yeah, there's a Hall of Fame so far. So we're going to have her back for a third. Whoever comes on third, I think we have Blake over at Open Doors.
Blake Lawrence for sure, yep.
We have a couple. We have, anyways.
Tanya Yuki technically also.
Yeah, it's true. So we'll have to see in 2022 who can be, that three-peat, if you will. Henry Ong was an amazing guest, Will, because he had, his resume is just silly, right? Like over at Marvel, and then he was at Disney, and he really
I believe he's the director of brand production now, or brand product at Universal Studios now.
Okay, yeah, so he even moved on from there, because at the time we spoke to him, he was a consultant, but what's amazing about his career is he really focused on the, DTC, but also streaming. So we really wanted to get into him about Netflix. And what really fascinated me was the binge model. Over the last, year or two, Netflix has experience with this, both not only on the season 1, part A, part B, but also only releasing shows on a weekly basis like it used to be when we were kids, Will. Right. And I asked him, do you think Netflix will ditch that binge model, and how streaming will change when it comes to, getting fans excited for that next episode?
And that's a really interesting question from a content standpoint, right? Like you work so hard and have all these actors and production people to make this beautiful series. And do you really want people to watch it in the span of, 1.5 days in a weekend?
And here's the big thing that the reason I asked this question, and we'll roll it here in a second, is from a social media standpoint, right. You have to hold back so many quote unquote spoiler alerts because you don't know when people are picking it up. Jesus. I'd love to get your thoughts on the pros and cons of releasing a new show all at once versus week to week, because we've seen the cable TV model, the week to week and the anticipation, something like, Game of Thrones, all that type of talk and water cooler talk that you can really build upon with your fan base and with the community. But Netflix and streaming, they were known for, let's just dump the full season and you can watch it all tonight if you would like. So it's interesting. It's kind of changed the last couple of years where all streaming services, particularly Netflix, are like, no. We're all about binge watching. But now it seems like they're experimenting with the old true method of let's do week to week.
Right. I think what it is when it comes to streaming and working with innovative companies like Netflix, it's about how do we redefine the playbook, right? And when you had for years and decades, everyone doing appointment viewing with the week to week. They're
Right.
like, why don't we just toss that playbook and do something different? And you know what? We're just going to offer everything immediately. And right there, that signals differentiation, right?
Correct.
A reason why you should be subscribing to Netflix. And this is especially during the early years, and it makes complete sense.
It's true.
And what I love about Netflix is as they progressed, they were a company that was also data driven. So they started to notice that there were certain types of shows that people love to devour immediately.
Right.
But there was also shows that people like to savor, right, and take their time with. And I think that was when they were starting to experiment with the release scheduling. You have other competitors that were doing that. And I think for a consumer, I'm just going to say, I think frankly, as a consumer, I just want everything available immediately, right? Because you're paying for that month to month. But when I want it immediately, it's more of, I want to watch it on my own terms. Either I could be a person that wants to watch all of it now within a day or two, or I could take my time on demand whenever I want and watch it and savor it, right? I love the beauty of that. But from a business side of things, it could be a little bit different. I think it all depends. There isn't a right or wrong strategy right now when it comes to releases, but you got to be thoughtful of what you have in your hands. So, for example, when you have a television show like The Mandalorian, right, which is absolutely great, based on a franchise that everyone knows. You have the permission to do it week to week, because although some of your fans may complain a little bit, they're going to watch it regardless, right?
Yeah.
So I think that when it comes like the Mandalorian example, though, I think the benefit as a company is that if it goes week to week, then your marketing strategy shifts.
Yes.
And you're looking at the long game here now, because it's not like something that you dump once, like a film, and then it's gone. It's much more, I think, as a person who worked on TV, a little bit more challenging, because to sustain people's interest for 2 months is not easy these days. Right. But when you have a great franchise like Mandalorian, you can sustain that with great creative, and also as a marketer who probably saw the season way ahead and was able to plan out strategically which episodes you knew were going to have some twists and turns, and then amp up the marketing activity behind that during that week. It gives you a longer story and gives you more time in the social conversation, right? Stretching that out for a longer period of time.
All right, great stuff from Henry. And again, what was so interesting about that is if you do episode by episode, you kind of follow along on social media. There's spoilers. There's so many, I guess, pros and cons of just like binge releasing, but also following along with the viewer as they're going. I remember just with the Breaking Bads of the world and Sopranos, when it was released every Sunday, you just kind of built up some more water cooler talk and momentum going into each show.
Yeah, I think as a fan, you almost, that delayed gratification, right? You don't want the 2 days with the content. You're like, all right, I got to wait a whole year for this to come back. Now you want that kind of 8-week period.
As a kid, the whole Christmas, almost 90% of it is the anticipation for it, more so than just the day of. Right. So, all right, so we're going to move on to Alec Palmer. He works in the athlete space. At the time, worked over at Momentum.
He's now the director of social over at the LA Kings.
Oh, nice. So over at the LA Kings now, who do an amazing job on social media. So just got into him about networking and how he's kind of battled through his career working on the athlete side and the sports side. Any advice? I mean, you're obviously a former athlete and now you're working in marketing, working in professional sports. But for anybody coming up, any advice or stuff that you've learned throughout your career that you would share?
Making sure you know the difference between connecting with people to connect and connecting just to connect. And what I mean by that is you want to build genuine friendships. You want to build genuine relationships with the people you're connecting with. You don't want to just be that person who DMs someone every time there's a job opportunity. And you're like, hey, can you put in a good word? And it's like, I don't even know who you are. Never talked to you ever. And that's, to me, is like one of the reasons I always got turned off by LinkedIn, was it very much felt that way. And there's a lot of people just kind of connecting, just getting as many people as you can. But to me, it's all about building those connections. It's all about building relationships and making sure that you're maintaining those, because you don't know when those relationships might come into play.
All right, so let's move on, Will, to Twitter. So Christine Wicks was an amazing guest on the program. Definitely highly recommend anybody that wants to know more about Twitter. And we've talked to the great TJ Adeshola and a bunch of people over on the Twitter side. But I wanted to talk to her specifically, and she's over at Amazon Prime now on the broadcast side as TNF becomes the exclusive home over there at Amazon. But it was a hot topic at the time, Will, but this idea of engagement humping and brands hopping in the conversations that maybe they shouldn't be a part of. I saw a kind of a not argument, maybe debate happening. I think it was on Twitter, a little bit on Instagram, the last couple of weeks about engagement humping, they were calling it. But Twitter specifically, but social media has really turned more into memes. I think Elon Musk on Clubhouse said, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a meme's worth 10,000 words. So it really is a way that we're communicating, similar to how emojis were not really a thing in the past, and that becomes such a huge part of our dialogue when you text someone or what have you. But in sports specifically, I feel like the memes are becoming such a huge part of strategy. It really is about showing James Harden walking into an arena, and then you have a blank canvas to say what this means, or walking into the weekend like, or whatever those different memes are. But I'm sure you've been so close to it. I'm sure you've seen that transition or the new era of how to follow sports.
Yeah, it's been kind of the casual fan side of it, right? I think memes are born, and then you have all these different verticals being able to tap into it, and you kind of get to attract yourself to a different fan because it's something that we haven't done before. It's so different from the box scores and the stats and things like that. True. That are for those diehards, but then you get to kind of pull in the culture side of it with these memes that can span any vertical, and you're kind of reaching that new casual fan. I think being able to kind of have that kind of segue of reaching another fan, I think is always fun, and it helps keep it light. It keeps it fun. I think on Twitter, again, it kind of goes with the breaking news kind of comedy angle of it, where you're tapping into what's happening now in that real time. And I think what I always find funny is that you see it on Twitter, but then you'll see a screenshot of it on Instagram and someone posts that as so again, your term of engagement humping is kind of using the same content in other places. And again, people are coming back to Twitter to talk about it. But again, I think you're able to kind of tap into a different audience, which I know brands are looking for, partners are looking for nowadays more than ever. And I think the other piece too, and one that I always find do a really good job with it, is that all the clubs from different leagues have found such a good way to find their voice. And I think they always do a really good job at kind of utilizing the memes in a different way that kind of tie back to their fan base and what they're known for. So they always do a good job with it. But memes definitely are born on Twitter, and definitely have some good runs on Twitter for sure.
All right, so next we are going to go to Shareablee. She is the CEO, Tanya Yuki, and she just geeks out about data. I think I do as well. She probably does a little bit more than me.
You guys could have gone for a few hours.
Yeah, but we were on a panel together over at #Sports as well, which you can go back and check out on the pod, as we had a recording of that. But she is really big on influencers because she looks at them as content creators that are constantly testing their audience, constantly rinsing and repeating things that work and knowing what doesn't work. And that's what's so great about it. So we really got into how influencers handle their content and how they stay true and authentic to their audience. There is a huge issue with Megan Thee Stallion not thanking TikTok for her rise to stardom. Like, people are really angry about how dare you not appreciate where you came from. And to your point, that kind of speaks to like, oh, we're higher than that. We can't speak down to,
right
to that level.
Yeah. So it is a huge culture change. And look, I remember when we rolled out our first influencer product, I was like, I'm just going to reach out to a ton of digital influencers and just interview them to understand, I just want to understand, right? Particularly influencers who became influencers at 16, and that's kind of all that they do. And the thing that jumped out to me in these conversations was, there were these kids and they weren't sophisticated about certain things about marketing or anything like that. But my gosh, when you got them going on the ins and outs of their audience, they knew their audience cold. They could predict, they were hairline crack sensitive to anything that their audiences wouldn't like or wouldn't resonate with them. And they were so protective to take care of their audience and create things that would make them happy. And again, it was such a different perspective where all other media says start with the content first and then target the audience, whereas this is audience first, and it's pretty revolutionary. It will change how all content is created.
All right, so you're gonna be able to tell in this next clip, there was a theme in 2021, Will, as we were building out the athlete division at STN, how passionate I am about the athlete and making money. We talked to my guy Preston McClellan over at the PGA Tour, and he was ahead of player development, as I almost knocked my water for a second time, Will. We'll continue to move forward here.
Mixing the lid over there, man.
But I talk with my hands way too much. But anyways, I asked him, for the PGA specifically, so many big names on the tour, how they can maximize their opportunity with their audience? We kind of got into it because I was so excited to talk to you, but can you break down for the audience, just, being the director of player content, what does that mean for the PGA? How do you help the players? All that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. The tour is kind of unique, and I'll start there in that we're a membership organization. So we're actually more like a players association than a league. So that is kind of going to inform how I'm answering this. And that part of what we do here is to provide as many opportunities for our players as possible, particularly financial opportunities. So if you had to boil down our mission statement to one sentence, it's to increase the financial opportunities of our members. And what I do really ties into that, and that we really want to provide them with as many resources as possible to build their own brands on their own platforms, and kind of from a media perspective. And we're a big believer in the metaphor of, a rising tide lifts all ships, and that if more people are following the players, more people are going to inherently follow the PGA Tour. And if you're a person in general, you want to connect with another person, an athlete versus the league.
All right, so going out next, wanted to talk to that big brand there in Atlanta. Will, you may have heard of it, Coca-Cola. Yeah, so Crystal Ivy, brand manager over at Diet Coke, and I was just really fascinated. They have so many different products, right, that end up coming up. So many products that Coca-Cola owns and spins off. Ask her how the social strategy is looked at every time they launch a new product. Well, speaking of social, I would love to see how you attack it. Again, being both, P&G and also Coca-Cola, but like how you use social, because again, when you have all that brand awareness already kind of baked into it, what's your thoughts on how to leverage social? You talked a little bit earlier about just creating a deeper connection with your core demo, but when you guys either are going into a Instagram strategy or thinking about launching a new platform like a TikTok or what have you, what's kind of the overall mission from a Coca-Cola usually?
Most definitely will say, especially when we think about new products, awareness is always the big thing there. So making sure that we're using our platforms to build that awareness behind the new innovation that we're working on. I will say that most definitely, I think an important piece of that is, as we're building out our marketing plan, is just making sure that we engage and involve social as quickly and as soon as possible, and not treat it as an afterthought. Just because there's so much power in what social can bring for us. Even if I think about PR campaigns or activations that I've done for Diet Coke, social has literally played a big role in those activations, because we just know the importance of getting your fans behind you and getting that support, and leaning on influencers like platforms as well. So it just plays that big of a role, again, getting them in early.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Coca-Cola owns about 250 different products. Either they create it from scratch or they acquire them. So, Crystal Ivy really gave us insight into how it all works down there in Atlanta, and I guess I'm sure Coca-Cola has offices all around the world. But
her answer right up our alley too, right? Get social involved early. Make sure you're listening to your audience, do what they want, and then just get that feedback and take that to your marketing team.
Yeah, and so this next one I want to queue up, Will, and this was a really interesting conversation. So I love talking to other leaders outside of maybe the traditional sports entertainment Fortune 500 brands to really get a sense of how can we learn from these different industries in terms of how they look at marketing, customer success, etc. So, talking to Julia over at Eklund Gomes on the real estate side, right? And what's so interesting is they're going after people that have to afford $50 million for a building. So how do you attract a certain key demographic that is not only interested in what you're selling, but also has the finances to do so? So I asked her, just from all different angles, how do you market and how do you make sure you reach your consumer that can actually press purchase or that call to action?
And I would say a third thing to give them credit too is they were doing this at a time where people could not come physically look at the properties.
Absolutely, during COVID. So you'll find her answer quite interesting. As I wasn't expecting this, but it makes a ton of sense. Love to hear from you, because you're dealing with such high net worth individuals and you're going after a very key demographic, very specific demographic. With all due respect, it doesn't really help you if you're, reaching the 34-year-old in Wisconsin that makes $49,000 a year if you're selling a, $19 million building, whatever it may be. So how do you guys, how have you found that success and where to find those people? And ultimately, whether it comes to paid media or search or different things, where have you found success there?
Our philosophy is just hit them at all angles, because you never know, the individual that may never be able to purchase one of our properties may know the perfect buyer for that property.
Yeah.
So for us, it is, if you think about, again, this is the viewership. We're hitting them at all angles. If it's, obviously Frederick, who's been on, I don't even know what seasons they're on, 11 or 12, whatever it is, $1 million listing New York. And now, of course, a full-time cast member of LA. So we've got the TV, we've got the social media, we've got some paid advertising, we've got the Zillow. I mean, we are hitting them at every possible angle. And I think that, again, seeing that on repeat, whether it's our branding, our logo, the parent company, and then of course the properties, I think is absolutely critical because, you have this philosophy, and, I know Zillow and some of the other companies have dealt with it a lot where, homeowners in a certain price range don't want their properties out there. And, we're one of the teams that disagree with that because, again, it's a numbers game. And the more eyeballs that you can possibly get on something just ultimately mathematically confirms that that's the higher chances of getting the best price for the property. So we are very, very big in that, like a digital blanket of everything we can get out there.
All right. So good stuff from Julia right there. The director of marketing or marketing director over at Electric, Ian Folk, joined us on the program. And this shouldn't be anything new technically, but be authentic, be genuine to the platform, provide value to your consumers. But I love what Ian keyed in on here is really creating trends in your market versus chasing trends. Are you being authentic? Are you being genuine to the platform? And are you bringing value to your customer? And those three things seem so simplistic and so basic that you kind of feel bad saying it as a core tenet. But a lot of brands get that wrong.
And a lot of brands are popping up on Instagram and Facebook every single day that are direct to consumer only brands. I don't want to say, I'm not here to judge and say that they're not authentic because maybe they're totally authentic to what they're trying to do. But from Electric's point of view of them kind of chasing our market, it's like they're not authentic because they're doing things at half the price. They're getting stuff made in China versus our factories are all made in Italy of very high quality. So they're basically, it's a race.
And you're like, hey, I don't see you guys at the surf competitions. Where are you at, man?
Yeah, you don't have a team. Exactly. You don't have team riders on the World Championship Tour.
Right.
You're not trying to bring athletes up from the youth that show a lot of talent that could be with your brand for 10 to 15 years. And you guys can really help each other out in a partnership. So we see a lot of this kind of race to the bottom in eyewear right now through social specifically. And a lot of those brands are really just chasing trends. They're not creating them. And so that's kind of like where Electric, it's like before we ever put a product into market, like we look at it for months, we talk about it, we bring in our athletes, ambassadors. What do you guys think? What do you see in the market? How does this feel? Is this authentic to Electric? Like, is this us? If it's us, then we're in 100%. And if it's not us, then we just go, hey, we're going to put that back out into orbit. We're going to talk about that later. It doesn't make sense for us right now. Let's not try to push it into market because that's what we see other people doing. That's not Electric.
Yep.
I think that's what brands need to do because trust me, we get excited about things like, oh, should we build this? Should we build that? And then, if you sit down and you have the real conversations, you realize quickly that it's either right or wrong for your business. And if it's wrong, stop trying to justify it. Go a different direction.
All right, great stuff from Ian and the Electric brand. Moving on to the NHL, Will. Sean Dennison. You know what's interesting as I go through this year in review? I think everybody we talked to got promotions last year. Sean Dennison was the director of social media. I think he's VP or I saw LinkedIn change recently, so good for Sean.
Not many of the titles are the same, a year, 6 months later.
Yeah, but the NHL, under his leadership, have done a lot of great things and to try to increase that brand, especially on digital. And he really focused on UGC and this fact of being more original and genuine with their raw content. And he really spoke to humans over highlights.
That's a really difficult question too for anyone on social, right? Like, how do you create content that everyone's going to love without pissing off your core demographic while attracting new customers? Extremely difficult balancing act.
Here's what he had to say. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to involve fans as you're entering into new markets. Every league wants to get younger. I think every league wants to get more diverse, but you have this fine balance, and we deal with this too with all of our clients. Like, you don't want to alienate a portion of your current audience, but you want to grow in different areas and provide content that's, for Gen Z and to get more diverse. So again, I'm sure a lot of conversations internally you guys have had in those, but how do you, again, another balancing act you have to have, how do you guys approach it?
To my boss, Heidi Browning's credit, a few years ago, she created what was called the Power Players Council. And it is internal advisory council, youth advisory council of teenagers who are hockey fans that come from all different backgrounds, ethnicities, and regions throughout North America.
That's awesome.
That advise us on how they consume hockey on social media, on broadcast, ideas, their sounding board. It is like a very interactive focus group that we have that provides us with incredible ideas, insights, and perspectives that frankly we otherwise wouldn't have, because we have no one working internally that is of that age.
Right.
And Gen Z is such a dynamic and, up and coming generation that we have so much learning to do. So that's been super valuable for us. And one of the things that they've certainly told us, and as I was just saying earlier, the data reinforces, is that they want more of that authentic content. The stuff that is less polished, that is more raw, that certainly features people. But, are those human moments? It doesn't mean they don't value highlights, but certainly focus more on those humans. We operate with this mantra called humans over highlights, where highlights are great, but it's those human stories that really resonate and also that really go viral. Those moments where you don't have to be a hockey fan to appreciate it. And so that's really the kind of stories that we aim to tell.
So, I thought we did a really good job of tapping into esports in 2021. And we talked to Ryan Prager, who oversees partnerships and social media. I don't know, Team Liquid, the Dallas Cowboys, the LA Lakers, the Yankees of their sport, esports. But in particular, I know, when they first started, we always kind of not joke, but, the only sponsors that really were interested were maybe an energy drink company or a keyboard company or a mouse company. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's 100% true.
Yeah, and how do you find content creators in this new age that aren't gonna irritate the gaming audience? Because I think they can, more so than any audience will, I feel like they can see right through, if you're not being genuine to them and if the product doesn't make sense. So I liked really what Ryan had to say here. You guys know really how to attract Gen Z audience. You know how to speak to them. You know how to create communities. So is there anything, again, kind of putting your consulting hat on, outside of esports that you've just seen work really, really well in terms of the content, campaigns, how to build that community? Because I think it's just an interesting topic that every brand's trying to get younger. They're trying to diversify their audience and are trying to just get tips and tricks of what seems to be working with that demo.
That's a tough one. I know the conversations we always have is like, it was easy when everybody watched TV. Now they're all over the place. I don't know. I think big picture, just following the content, following the creators. It's a lot of extra work, to be honest, but like finding the person who aligns with you. I know influencer marketing is kind of a touchy subject, because there's a lot that can go wrong with that. But I do think some of the most perfect kind of crossovers are the ones where they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Or the guy who's been wearing a Nike hat on stream for the past 3 years and then just gets the crossover because they're like, oh right, he really does like Nike, and it makes sense. So,
all right. So I think it's pretty well documented. Will, pretty much a fanboy of Liquid Death. I was someone that bought the product, and I was like, Will, let's go talk to somebody over there. So we reached out to the VP of e-commerce and digital, my man Hamid at Liquid Death. By the way, on LinkedIn, I think they recently got another round of funding, so they're crushing it. They're killing it. Great brand. I'm telling you, listen to this episode because it's so good about a brand that really took a hard right and went away from what everybody else was doing. I think so often people look at their competitors and they copy with quote unquote what works. And they just did an amazing job of being a disruptor in their space. And I love how you put this. I use this on calls. I'm going to tell Hamid thank you because I steal it from him. But blanding over branding and how Liquid Death rose to the top based on that concept. Those of you that aren't familiar with Liquid Death, mountain spring water in a aluminum can, which again is pretty rare for water these days, and looks like, a lot of people say, like a Miller Lite beer can, right? So that it definitely turns a lot of heads, especially when kids may be drinking it, or you may be drinking it in your car or what have you. So I want to get into that a little bit because there's a whole section I have for you in terms of the brilliance of the marketing of this product. But being one of the first employees, what was the original vision behind that? Was it just that, like, hey, if we can market this a slightly different way, we really have a shot here? Like, what was the vision behind starting the company?
Yeah, so I kind of built my chops in advertising, and so did Mike Cesario, who's our founder and CEO. So Mike and I worked together in advertising for 2 years, and it was our last real jobs before the Liquid Death thing. He was running creative. I was kind of running the business side for some of the biggest CPG brands on earth. And I think for us, it was just like the speed of decision making and how ideas were coming to bear just felt so off to us. You know, for us, like as some people who've grown up in digital, and me being a digital native, it's like, what do you mean we have to wait 6 months for this campaign and then 6 months postmortem? It's like, for us, we just wanted to iterate and test on something. But I think as Mike was kind of like looking at the landscape as someone who grew up in the punk metal kind of skate world, the things that end up being the worst for you generally have the best marketing, right? So all the candy brands out there, all the soda and pop and energy drinks, like they have the best marketing. And so what Mike, as someone who eats typically vegetarian and is super health conscious, you know, he found like there's a little bit of a white space, especially in a commodity space like water, where every brand felt and looked the same. It's kind of like what's just happening with like D2C brands. Like every brand kind of feels and takes on a certain aesthetic.
And you know this being like a marketer too. Like, I mean, logos now are just becoming the same typeface across the top 50 Fortune 500s. You know, it's interesting how it's doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of it's unfortunate that the D2C-ification of things has now spilled over to the big, you know, enterprise brands and trying to take that because they think that it works. But I think there is a little bit of a wear out. You know, the word blanding became, I think, common for us all to kind of like talk through. But yeah, we just took the approach of like, we just want to bring more fun to a commodity space and do things that feel completely different and talk to an audience that generally doesn't get talked to.
Yeah.
You know, and isn't represented in ads and creative and messaging. And so that's where really the idea started off from. And, you know, people have taken on to it and it's constantly evolving. Like our first cohort of customers were metal, punk, skate people that we targeted to. And now it's like they've become our diehard loyalists. So if someone does talk bad about us in a common thread, like they kind of feast upon them and just devour them. And so we've been able to kind of build little loyalty groups and cohorts as this brand has grown from being a metal brand to now it's like, it's a brand for everyone, from kids to hip hop to EDM. It does not matter. At the end of the day, if you just want to feel better about what you're consuming, and it's not a crappy plastic bottle, and you don't have to have people asking you all the time, like, why are you not drinking? Like that's another part of kind of what we bring to the table. Liquid Death is the perfect brand for that.
All right, so moving from Liquid Death to a pretty awesome brand as well. They've done it really well, Peloton. So we talked to Skip Wilson, the global brand and communications lead over at Peloton. And, you know, he was really passionate, as am I, as is this program. We talked about it multiple times. We've had, you know, different panels as well, Will, on just diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, I wanted to make sure that he was able to speak on this as well. So here's what he had to say about how he approaches it inside Peloton, and also as professionals, how we also look at it inside our organizations. It's a theme that we brought up throughout the podcast over the last couple of years, and I'm passionate about it as well, as diversity, inclusion, and equity, and how, you know, maybe at Precor you saw that done, how you want to extend that in Peloton, just as a professional overall. You know, maybe some advice or thoughts you have for other leaders that they can take away from that.
Yeah, and I have the pleasure of sitting here as a Black gay man here, and I've also had the experience of being the only Black gay man, Black man, or person of color within an organization, within a leadership team. You know, it's something that it's not weird for me. It's understood. I wish it were different, but it is what it is. And so I think there is a responsibility as I have advanced in my career, not only to teach and to train and to coach folks who are on my team, that we have the power to do something different, but then also to reach out to my peers and colleagues and say, hey, we've got to put a plan in place, or we've got to recognize this. And I think what has happened over the last year, 2 years, particularly with the social justice environment in the United States, is many companies are looking for help in understanding how they can do better. And we at Precor launched, you know, our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging group to figure out really how do we not necessarily promote what we're doing externally, but figure out how we impact our culture internally. And for me, that's a safer space to be, because I want to impact the environment that is directly around me, right? And I do have the capability and the trust and the confidence in my team that people want to make change. They're just not sure how to have that conversation. What does change look like? What is that hard conversation? Do we need to what should we be doing differently? So we're taking a look at recruitment. We're taking a look at promotions. We're taking a look at where we source talent, whether that, if we always source talent from a particular school or particular network, we're really not going to be impacting our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And for me, I think it's important to understand that diversity is not just about skin tone, right? It can be difference of thought, difference of geography, difference of age, obviously shape, right? All of these other things that really impact how an organization functions and is represented to the world. And so in my domain, which I kind of control, we kind of have a nice test case, and we're pretty open about having these conversations of what it means to be inclusive, what we can do better, what's probably a longer term goal versus what we can do right now, and what is really required for change. What is essential that I've learned is you have to have leadership support. It can't just be lip service. And one of the things that we were talking about social is, yeah, we put out our diversity statement, and rightfully so. Customers will write back and be like, well, you put out this statement. Where's the proof?
What's the latest? Yeah.
Yeah. Show us your stats. Show us what has changed, right? And so that's one of the things that Peloton does really well. We've just recently reduced our price on our products and apps to make fitness more accessible to more people. So it's, fitness and well-being should not be a luxury good, right? That should be part of inclusion, right? And so there are all these things that we can do to help benefit our organization, but the communities that we serve, which I think I would like to become more natural. And I think just by having these conversations, whether you get tired of them or not, you do have to keep having them.
Great stuff by Skip there, and just really providing a lot of value, I think, for our audience, Will, on how to approach these
100%.
discussions and conversations. And like I said, we're all passionate about this. We'll continue to talk about these things as we go into 2022. Is I think not only is it how do I get more engagement or more followers on social, but how do you build better teams? How do you have more inclusion in your organization? So love Skip's episode, and definitely highly recommend that one. I recommend all of them, but good show there. All right, so moving on to Jack in the Box, which is really interesting. They've done a really amazing job on social media as well. Again, another brand that I appreciated from afar. And they reached out to STN recently, and I was like, we got to get them on the pod, Will. So Morgan Higgins this is a dual, kind of a panel episode, I guess, but a dual pod for the price of one. We had Morgan Higgins, he's a senior manager of social media and PR, and then also Sheena is a senior director of marketing and communications. And Morgan, I'll toss it up to her what she said. They both had amazing things to say throughout the program, but what I loved the most was what Morgan said: sales overnight, branding over time. There's a lot of things, right? There's brand awareness. I'm sure there's, different apps and different incentives for your loyal customers, but also there's trying to get people to go through the drive-through or visit your locations. So from a social media perspective, we'll start there, Morgan. How do you, with all those different goals, do you just focus on brand awareness and the rest works out for itself, or do you attack each of those goals or CTAs differently throughout the year?
My purpose from the social space is really, really to focus on the brand metrics that we have. So building engagement, building overall brand mentions. We track them on a annual, quarterly, monthly basis. I think it's to just overall, we talk about, saying of sales overnight, brand over time. So a big piece of my area is how do I connect with those customers over time? How do I build the connection with them? That's going back to the one-to-one communication that I want to have with them. But how do we entertain them in so many different ways? So there's that first piece of the brand. And then there's really more recently on the social space, we've been doing a lot of the lower funnel sales driving tactics, especially around app acquisition. So we're really trying to build that ROI and how we can get our customers in the door. But because we are heavily brick and mortar, we have to do it through our app acquisition efforts. So it's a hybrid approach of the two, but mostly where my team focuses is in the brand space and building that connection with the customers.
All right, so going back into our esports world, Ben Gallagher, he was a COO and co-founder of Full Squad Gaming. They grew 900,000 followers in 72 hours. That's not bad.
That's pretty good.
Pretty good job there. So I was like, dude, you got to break this down. How did you do it? And he had some amazing things to say. He also worked over at Bleacher Report and NFL Checkdown. So talk about a guy that understands audience, community, and how to build brands. Ben's the dude right there. So a great pod if you want to know how to launch brands, grow community, which I'm guessing if you're listening to this show, you probably want to do all those things. So here's what he had to say about that 900,000 followers in 3 days. So from a content standpoint, are there any tips or tricks or things that you guys have learned that, you just notice people are wanting to interact a different way? Because you see, obviously, Twitch, having that real-time chat, being able to talk with the host. I just feel like the way we absorb content, especially the younger generation, is going to change if it hasn't already.
Most definitely. I think we're seeing content change all the time, like even at a higher acceleration than it ever has. And I think part of the reason is everyone knows what it's like to have actually created a piece of content. Whereas like back in the day, Instagram wasn't content creation. It's like you snap a photo on your phone, which everyone was doing previous.
Throw a filter on it and you're done. Yeah.
Everyone had done that before Instagram and the advent of filters and everything. But now, like, folks on TikTok, everyone knows what it's like to create a piece of content. They understand the risk and reward of what you can and can't do on the platform.
All right, let's go back to ESPN. My guy, Matt Kinney, he's the head of combat sports and pro basketball programming and acquisitions over at ESPN and ESPN Plus. Go way back with Matt, worked with him quite a bit on some really amazing programs and specials on the ESPN side, and just really teed up for him. We really talk about the whole industry, Will, about broadcasting and streaming and how COVID has changed things and how do you balance linear versus OTT and how ESPN is going through all that. But, just amazing stuff. And here's Matt Kinney on all things ESPN. What is your balance between real-time marketing on social and keeping the pay-per-view and the live event exclusive and making sure you're staying true to the partner and the revenue generator?
There's no shortage of live events. There's this seeming sense of you could just post something. Just post it, right? And I remember when I got schooled on this, back in when we were working on Crawford and Khan together. It was around the theatrical release of Avengers Endgame.
Yep.
And so here we have this beautiful spot and we have this big fight coming up. And then there's this like, hey, we got to get it out there. And then you hear and those in the social space, I'm sure you appreciate, just post it. And the science, I learned so much from that experience because the science and the art associated with leveraging social to actually connect in meaningful ways to accomplish the thing that you want is more than just posting it.
Yeah. So what's funny is everything comes full circle. Me and Katie first met each other. We worked on the social media for Top Rank Boxing and ESPN. Met Matt Kinney probably a couple of weeks after that. And Matt tells a story of learning from that event where Katie Daly's like, I can't just post everything. Like, you got to give me some strategy here. You got to give me some authenticity with my audience. And he learned from that, which I'm sure a lot of us, have learned ourselves or try to speak up to the higher ups of how this thing works. And again, if you're trying to program Comedy Central, it'd be disingenuous to put a soap opera on that channel because people are expecting a certain type of content delivered a certain type of way. So no, it's no different in social media. It's funny how Matt kind of came to that realization. But again, another great episode talking about the future of OTT, ESPN sports, how COVID's changed things, broadcasting overall, the Manning cast. It was just chock full of really fun stuff.
I think in his case too, and I'm sure Katie let him know, when you have a partner like Marvel and Disney, who obviously owns both ESPN and Marvel, you can't just post it. When you're releasing something around Avengers Endgame, a movie that I think broke every box office record in existence, you can't just post it. And people like Katie know exactly the timing and the way to do that best.
Love it, love it, love it. Well, Mr. Will Kelly, man, I want to just take the time to thank you for all your hard work and determination to book all these amazing guests. I mean, that's a pretty damn... You don't really realize as you're doing it, but when you look at all those logos and all those brands and all that value that we brought the listeners, but also, I mean, it's a selfish endeavor for me too. Like, I literally learn at least one major thing each and every episode, and I find myself a week later in a sales call or in a team meeting kind of bringing up a note. Liquid Death, for instance, was something that we kind of sent to our creative team. It's just like a different way to look at things and being disruptors as we work with different brands. So, I mean, that's first and foremost, man. So great work on booking all the A-list stars there, Will Kelly.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And to give some credit back to these people, almost all these connections have come from either clients or former guests who have been so kind to introduce us to people in their network who take the time out of their day to prep and come on the show and answer all of our questions. So,
Will Kelly, really a masterclass for you in business and in your career to know you're only as strong as your network. So the Will Kelly Rolodex continues to really increase here.
No, that is definitely a benefit. And I also get to, sit here and listen to people at Patagonia and Coke and all these brands, give their advice and all these questions and stuff that I do every day. So there is a lot to gain from it from a personal standpoint.
I don't know what it was. I don't know if I was on a panel or I was doing like a mini pod, but I remember you said so eloquently in 2021, Bricks, I kind of forget, but you are really a social media expert. I'm like, try to hang my hat on that, so. Yeah, great work, and thank you so much to not only all the amazing guests for taking time out of their busy schedule, but you as well. We know you guys have so much going on in your different careers and different life, and what has proven to be yet another difficult year with everything going on in the world. But you guys have taken the time to spend 45 minutes or an hour with us pretty much per week over the last year or so. So we really appreciate that. Appreciate all you guys reviewing us 5 stars on iTunes as well. I guess with that, Will, as we go into a new year, any last things as we close the chapter on 2021?
No, I think just looking back, like you said, the logos really speak for themselves, and the people that we were fortunate enough to interview, it was great, and we're very blessed. And I think in 2022, we're really ramping this thing up a little bit. I think we want to get a little bit more diverse and start interviewing more people from some different sectors, and just kind of keep doing the same thing, but turn it up a few notches.
Don't want to spoil it too much, but a new studio as well, moving studios. I mean,
rumors of a new office.
Sources close to Will Kelly say there's a new studio coming up.
I'm sure that'll go swimmingly without one flaw, moving everything from here to a new place. But yeah,
I love the confidence, Will. I love the confidence. All right. So as always, thank you so much for listening to the Business Social Podcast powered by STN Digital. I want to thank producer Will Kelly, of course, not only for this episode, but for the whole damn year of all those back and forth and emails and getting all the amazing people on the pod, all those connections that not only, Will obviously started, but now I can call friends in the industry. And thank you so much. If you were on the show and now you're a listener, thank you as well for staying true and being a fan. But yeah, that's a wrap for 2021 as we want to just really consolidate all that. And although those are just little snippets, there's so much value in each of those. So if you want to go back to the pod, all that is there. And I really, truly believe for me, again, being this a selfish endeavor, if you listen on a regular basis, you're going to be able to keep your thumb on the pulse of this crazy, ever-changing industry. I know if I didn't have this podcast, I would lose out. I would forget some things. I want to understand things are moving and understanding from esports to ESPN broadcast to, all the other brands and what they're doing on the apparel side. I think you can learn what are the top 10 or 20 things you must know at this current juncture to be successful in the marketing space. So that's awesome. So thanks again for yet another edition of the Business Social Podcast. Thanks to Will, thanks to Furker on all their help on the program. My name's David Brickley. I'm your host, and this has all been powered by STN Digital.